Amen. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to read your Bible better. And we're going to start. I'm really pleased to do this with John. But I'm working on a series of things. If you don't understand Genesis, you don't understand the Bible. Now, that's a bit of a hard saying, isn't it? Yeah. Hard saying that. Right. Now, what is Genesis? What actually is it? When was it written? Who was it written by? What do we understand about it? You know, we've got talking snakes, giants, cannibals. We've got all kinds of things flying around in Genesis, haven't we? We've got the deluge, we've got the Tower of Babel. I mean, all these things, you know. How are we to understand these things? And the way to understand it is to understand it how the people who first heard it understood it. And what did it mean to them? And why is it written like this? Yeah? Because the church is teaching a lot of these things is so far divorced from how they started off, so lost in translation, and theologically, even the New Testament, we talk about New Testament, you know, the theology that the church fathers wrote that's got nothing to do with the life of Jesus and his disciples, really, in a lot of things, yeah, is 10 generations after the events. Through a different language, from a different culture, and then it's translated into English, into a different time, a different culture, and quite frankly, unless we understand the foundations, exactly what we're talking about this morning. And you know, there's a lot of dead wood needs to go. Yeah. So bear with me, and we'll do this like we always do. Please feel free to ask questions. Yeah? Please feel free. And you can't disagree with me on any of this stuff. In my wildest dreams. Okay. Okay, Genesis. Okay, right. John's going to deal with the first couple of chapters, and I'm going to deal with the whole thing as such. Now, Genesis really is in two completely different parts. Okay? Two completely different parts. Yeah? Genesis, as we have it, was probably, the final editions of it, were probably the Second Temple period, around about 300. Yeah? That's when you get the first Jewish Bible. Then slightly after they get the first Greek one, the Septuagint, or Septuagint if you're posh. And there's been an awful lot, you know, 2,000 years almost before, in this period that we're looking at. Okay, so the first 11 chapters, right, chapters 1 to 11, are what scholars call primeval history, okay? And then from chapter 12 onwards, where Abraham appears, that's when history, as we probably understand it, starts. Okay? So you've got your primeval history, and then you've got history in the sense that we know it. And that history, in those first 11 chapters, is a very different kind of history, because it's not like universal history, such as the Greeks and Romans brought forward. It's very, very different. And if any of you toiled your way through my book there, it's this difference between block thinking and logic thinking. But you've got to remember, these first 11 chapters, before you get to Abraham, there's no Israel, and there's no Jewish people. You following me? Yeah? And it's and writing is probably only just beginning to emerge. So we have these 17 narratives, 17 stories, if you like, that lead up to where the history of the Jewish people begin. So therefore, if you read, for instance, in some commentaries or in some what we call it, biblical history account, people try and begin the history of Christianity, if you want, or Judeo-Christianity. They try and begin it. They always begin it with Abraham and sort of try and ignore the rest of it. Yeah, but it's not that easy, because a lot of the things we need to learn are in these first 11 chapters. But as I say, they're not history as we know it, and they're not the history, yeah, of the one man who left Mesopotamia, and the 70 that left. Sorry, the 12 that went down to Egypt, and then the 70 that went, and so on. this portion before that, it isn't about these things. And that history is not the history of just Israel, it's the history of the whole ancient Near East. Mesopotamia, as it's called, the lands between the rivers. So you get people saying, oh, you find the flood, for instance, in other histories. Well, why not? Yeah, why not? But the point is, there's a very famous epic poem called the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it's the story of the flood, and it's got the righteous man. It's the 7th generation from Enoch, and it's the 10th from Adam, and all these things are the same. Well, of course they are, because it was all the same people. But God calls out people for himself, doesn't he? And this is what it's all leading up to. Now, I like to call the first 11 chapters of Genesis, I like to call it crime and punishment.
Crime and punishment?
Yeah, crime and punishment. Now, think about this. Okay, Adam and Eve commit a crime, don't they? And their punishment is being expelled from the Garden of Eden. Yeah. Then we got that wonderful story. Quick plug, it's my next book. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, which precede the deluge. About the sons of God and the daughters of men. We've got these fantastic giants, haven't we? The Nephilim and the Gibborim and all this sort of stuff. But you see, they commit a crime, yeah? And then there's 2 punishments. First, life expectancy is cut from these massive hundreds of years to 120 years. And then you get the flood as well. Crime, punishment, crime, punishment. Then we get to the Tower of Babel, don't we? Or Babel. Yeah? They decide they're going to climb up into heaven, push God off his throne, or be like him. Crime, punishment, languages separated into 72. Why was it 72? Why did Jesus send out 72 people? Why does number 72 keep cropping up? Answer, it's the generations from Noah. Yeah, so that's why this number 72 keeps coming up. Because Noah, remember, Noah and his family are the only people that survive in this monotheistic model that's been led towards. And so therefore, his generations are righteous. So he has 72 descendants, or 70. It's actually 70 in the Hebrew Bible, it's 72 in the Greek Bible. But so those figures depend whether you're reading Hebrew accounts or Greek ones. But that's the idea, that there will be generations of righteousness to follow. But of course that didn't work. We got the Tower of Babel. And then we keep going. And we get this sort of recurring pattern of rebellion against God brings displacement. It starts off with actual physical death and mass destruction. But if you look at the history of the Jewish people, it goes on, and the punishments become less severe eventually, until they get what was the ultimate for Jewish people, that they're dispossessed from the land. So if you look in our Genesis account at the various things that are going on, the first thing we need to know is these first 11 chapters consider what was considered by all mankind at the time. So in a sense it is a universal thing, because it all happens in this area between the 2 rivers, yeah? And that's a big area. And interesting enough, when we get to the account of the flood, the whole world was flooded. Was it? Of course it wasn't. Africa wasn't flooded. America wasn't flooded. Australia wasn't even heard of. But think about this. That big delta is something like 2,000 odd square miles. Yeah? And bear in mind, any vessel has got no propulsion systems, no guidance systems. Yeah? It's just floating. And you don't have to be too far into that lot with the curvature of the earth, and the whole world is covered. Yeah. So these things have all got very encouraging things to help us, without people saying, oh, that's rubbish, or, that's just a folk story, or something like this. All these things, are based on that. So therefore, it's fairly obvious that in the ancient Near East, a lot of their cultural history, practice and everything will be the same. Things only change when we get to chapter 12. So if we look at this, we can tell in the stories there's a lot of detail in there that we miss. Right. So where was the Garden of Eden? Well, the Ethiopians think Ethiopians think it's where Addis Ababa is now. Yeah. And various people think other things, but it's quite easy because we confuse names with descriptions. And this is important when you read through your Old Testament anyway. Now, just for instance, when we look at the story, like Avimelech is not a name, it's a title, it's a crown prince. Philcol, which translates as dark water into Hebrew, who's involved in the Genesis accounts, that's the name of the general of the army, that's his title. Yeah, Isaiah and Hezekiah on the wall having this conversation with Rafshakeh. That's not a name, that's a title, he's the king's herald. Yeah, so we can lose a lot of these things by confusing names with titles and places with descriptions and so on. And Eden actually is a Sumerian word which means the grassy district, the most fertile place. Yeah, so obviously if we're going to start a good story off, and John finishes before reading, so I'm not I'm not trading on my scientific toes, you see. There's nothing wrong having scientific toes. It's not a fault. Yeah, so a lot of these things actually give us a lot of information, a lot of description. But as I said, we really need to understand what these things are saying, and rather just disregard them as little tales. Yeah, so the first place that civilization is really taking place and getting identity, learning to communicate. You've got to bear in mind there's no real cities in these days, and they're putting the mind back and they're bringing these narratives, these stories, if you want, that are actually based on real things in a way that communicates easily, not just to a small group, but everybody in the area. And in a sense, that is why Judaism also attracted a lot of adherents from all the other nations, yeah, and so on. We'll also find in these first 11 chapters, we get this rather strange character, Enoch. Yeah. Enoch walked with God and was no more. Didn't die. It was translated to use the old King James version. Now, why should such an obscure little notice mean so much? Well, the answer is that when the Jewish canon, if you like, was put together, yeah, there was the book of Enoch was the most read and most important book in Second Temple Judaism. And this is all about Enoch walking with God and being no more. There's a whole kind of theology that arose out of that, which has been transposed into the book of Revelation in the New Testament. So these old stories, and these narratives that run through the first chapters of Genesis are very important for us to understand things. A bit like we were talking about the vain imaginations. See, that there's a lot of things in the New Testament that we don't realise harken back, to the Old Testament. But more importantly, and just as importantly, there's a load of books, a load of writings that aren't actually in the Old Testament or the New Testament. But in the Greek New Testament, there's 139 direct quotations or allusions to them. There's two in the book of Jude alone, and Revelation is countless. So it's quite important that we understand that these first 11 chapters are really important for what's going to come in the future, because a lot of their truth, I don't like that expression, my truth, your truth, but a lot of their theological view, if you like, really arises from these. Now, in parts of the Old Testament, and particularly in Genesis, there's certainly a notion, that they're not worshipping just one God. Now, the worship of one God is called monotheism, as you know, obviously, but one that you might not know, and was very common at this time, was henotheism. And that believes that various gods run various bits of geography. And you can see this in Numbers. Now, we all know the wonderful story of Balaam and his talking donkey, don't we? Yeah. That's good fun, that one, isn't it? But what you've got is you've got Balaam rushing up and down all these mountains, making sacrifices until he finds the right one. Yeah. So these things are reported because of common practices. And right through the whole of the Old Testament, the Jewish people were always in trouble for worshipping idols. Yeah. Or foreign gods or other gods. And we find really probably the first person who seems to recognise just one God, because it doesn't tell us too much about the other characters, does it? Until we get to chapters, middle of chapter 5 going through. But it tells us that Noah's name means comfort, by the way, and the female version is Naomi, which is Naomi and Ruth. It says in the King James, he was a preacher of righteousness. Yeah, in the Hebrew text, because it is Hasaki, he was a righteous man, a just man, and a righteous man. And you've got this, here really where we're getting the first expression of monotheism, and because he's the only one who recognises the true God, everybody else is wiped out basically. There is a legend that Og, you come across Og, King Og. Yeah, because he was supposed to be, apparently, he stood away on the roof of the ark in some of the Jewish folk tales and legends, but that doesn't really concern us.
That features on that Noah film, the documentary, sorry.
How does it?
Yeah, that's a Jewish production.
Yeah.
It's got lots of Jewish traditions in it. The watches and things.
Yeah. Oh, you see, that's all from Enoch.
Yeah.
You see, yeah. Just what John's talking about, we can just talk about that for a minute too, it's quite interesting. Genesis 1-4 is considered to be the most problematic text in the whole of the Bible. Yeah, because there's two understandings of this. Well, there's three actually, and the third one falls into several different categories. But basically, sons of God, angels or watchers in Book of Enoch. Yeah, and daughters of men, pretty girls, yeah, if you like, and the watchers of the angels fall madly in lust with them, come down to earth, have sexual relations, have children, and these children are giants. Yeah. So, if you read the actual text, it's really interesting. Just out of interest, somebody in the Bible, what sort of a Bible have we got? Anybody got a sensible one here? Sorry?
What version do you want?
English Standard Version. You've got English Standard?
Yeah.
See, a real scholar. Yeah.
Terribly unsensible.
No, we accept all readings except the King Arthur. Yeah. Can you read it?
Which one do you want, sorry? Genesis
6, verses 1-4.
Genesis 6, hang on. Genesis 6.
1-4. We might as well have a bit of fun with this, won't we?
It says increasing corruption on earth, it starts.
Yeah, nice.
Yep. Right. Right. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. And they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown.
Now that's really interesting, isn't it? Do you notice there's no criticism of this? Do you notice that? That's the first thing. So the sons of God are B'nai Ha-Elohim, and the mighty men are Ha-Giborim in Hebrew. Yeah. So if we look at, let's look at a slightly different version of that. Does anybody know what the Peshitta is? Anybody ever heard of it?
Heard of it,
Yeah. Right, the Peshitta is, there's two versions, the Syrian version and an Aramaic version. And these are very old. Yeah, very old. And it reads like this in the Peshitta. And it was when the sons of men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were very beautiful, and they took those women to them of all they chose. And the Lord God said, My spirit will not dwell with man for eternity, because he is flesh, and he shall live 120 years. And giants were on the earth in those days, also after this, because the sons of God came to daughters of men, and they gave birth to giants, though for old, vicious heroes of fame. And the Lord God saw that man was evil, and etc. So it's quite old, so that's an older reading than the one we've got. And then in the Jewish Bible, it's quite similar to that. So what we face with, what's this story actually about? Now,
Mine says Nephilim.
Nephilim, that's the Hebrew word for Nephilim.
And then I've just put some names to taught me. Fallen ones.
Yeah, that's what it meant. Well, actually, this is interesting. The only other Nephilim and its variants only appear 3 times, yeah, because they appear after the flood, don't they? Story of the spies, but they're referred to as Rephaim, so the Nephilim. But in Ezekiel, Nephilim means the ones that fell, but it doesn't mean. And this is where this whole idea that these were angels, yeah, came from. Is expanded greatness in this book of Enoch. So I say it's really quite challenging, because when you get the book of Enoch, these giants are also cannibals and just horrendous. But the Reformed theological position on this is quite interesting. It makes no sense, by the way. This is Lutheran Calvin and Company. They say, right, that the sons of God were blessed because they were the generation of Seth. Seth goes down to Enoch, so on, right? And they say that the sons of the daughters of men were the generations of Cain, which is nonsense, because there weren't any per se. So in modern day teaching, it'd be something like this, yeah. The boys from the church saw the girls that were pretty in the street with the makeup and short skirts and everything, lusted after them and fell from grace. That's the Protestant situation in a very modernised sort of way. But you see, the conundrum with this is why was there no criticism? Why did it not seem to be explained? Now, I'm going to talk to you in a minute about what a myth is to help us with these things. But this is my opinion. I think that this, I'm going to agree with a couple of scholars, they think this isn't a full account. Yeah? They think this is part of a story that's either been deliberately edited down or bits that were lost, and it's composed what they call mythemes, that parts of different sort of things. But I think the lesson we need to learn here is that the story of the Old Testament, until they come to a proper historical point of view, is trying to teach something that is ethical.
Yeah.
Yeah? It's trying to teach something ethical. And as such, we've got to stop thinking about this. We've got to stop thinking about it as the history of Israel. We've got to start thinking of the history of civilization. Because everybody starts off on the same starting blocks. Yeah? Let me say again. Everybody starts off on the same starting blocks. So these first primeval histories, if we want to keep calling them that, I think it's a good term as any, needs to be looked at what they are. They're teaching us about the foundation of civilization, where everybody basically has the same start, and various things start happening in these first 11 chapters. We've seen 3 examples of crime and punishment, if you like. There's a lot more in there, obviously. But the point I'm trying to make is, and John will tell you about the creation things, the point we need to understand is this is very valuable, because essentially it's the story of civilization. It's the story of mankind, the first 11 chapters. And then we find this wonderful kind of thing, if you like, where Abraham, who was obviously a moon worshipper to start with, and you've got to remember as well that Babel, yeah, and all this, you've got you've got these two opposites that are going on. And if you look at Old Testament history, you can see the starts of this here. You know, everybody starts in the same place with an equal chance. Then you've got good, following God, finding God, following God, ethical monotheism. Then you've got Babylon, the harlot of Revelation. And I always found it interesting that Alexander the Great, yeah, who cried when he got to the shores of India because there was no more world left to conquer, declared himself a god in Tanis in Egypt, but he actually died, and he knew he was dying, and he wanted to die in Babylon. Doesn't it say it all? So, you know, we're really looking at a lot of difficulties as we go along with this. And because the Old Testament is largely disregarded in a lot of Reformed churches, because translations have been quite liberal in the way they've translated things, we really need to examine these things a little bit better. So let me just run over some of the problems with translations, okay? Some words simply don't have an exact equivalent in English. They don't. And we don't have some words that we need, like German word Anfechtung, salt on the soul. We don't have in English. We don't have kind of a dynamic spiritual linguistic conveyance or words in more simple. Sentence constructs are different in different languages. They don't transfer from one to another in an understandable way. Some expressions are idiomatic or are short forms. Okay. In New Testament, Jesus talking. What does a bad eye mean? What's a bad eye?
Meanness.
Yeah, meanness.
Yeah.
Yeah, things like that. And what they do sometimes, if you can't translate it, instead of leaving it as a calc word is the same in like restaurant, circus, restaurant, cafe, words like that. They come into English without any change of word. It's better to leave them like that than yeah. And another problem you got when you translate into Greek, there's no definite article. Sorry, I've got that wrong, haven't I? There's no indefinite article in Greek.
I don't know what that is.
Oh, don't you? Right. Definite article is where there's only one. Yeah. The chair, if there's one, you've got six of them, and it's an a chair. Yeah. So what you've got a problem in Greek is, if you don't enumerate how many it is, you don't know. So you've got some real problems with numbers and that sort of thing.
Some of the, what's my understanding is some of the original Hebrew words they're not singular. When we have them back
plural.
in Ireland, it's plural.
Yeah, any verbs tend to be plural.
Yeah.
Living, anything that's living is plural. There's no in Hebrew. There's no such word as river. Well, there is, but I mean, you have to know. It's like rivers.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that. And in Hebrew, of course, there's no left or right. No, there's no left or right.
You've got to go straight ahead.
No, you turn left where there's six trees. You turn towards the sea where there's three trees. Because you've got no north, south, east and west. You got to the sea, to the Ardennes, to the Jordan, yeah, to the mountains, yeah, and to the Egyptians.
It obviously came about, though, didn't it? By Jesus saying, "Don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing." So it must have got, and obviously in modern Hebrew, there's left and right.
Well, yeah. Well, we could go. It'd be too long to get into that one, but yeah. There's no left.
Well, I say in modern Hebrew now. So
Yeah, well, in modern Hebrew. But I mean, that particular, yeah. I mean, there's loads of things like that, and they don't translate. And because a lot of church people who teach in, if I give you an example, the schools for ordinance in Chelmsford, okay. They asked a Bible question, and I'm this guy's mentor, and the guys marking it sent it back and said this is all irrelevant, and give him a pass mark, yeah. And I said and then when he got it marked by the examiner, yeah, he said we marked you down because you didn't include that, yeah, and that was because in there was some discussion of Hebrew idiom. And sort of Middle East, ancient Near East understandings. You know, take things out of the culture means something completely different. And that's why we have to realise in these first 11 chapters in Genesis, you know, we're well outside of our culture, we're outside of modern Judaism, right? And we're almost outside of what we know as Old Testament proper. These first 11 chapters. But I say it's important because it is the history of civilization. Now,
Fred, can I just ask another question?
yeah, that's what you like, Jim. You're always welcome, you know that. As long as you're not impertinent.
Well, you know, because I was a new believer, and I was, you know, because of the Genesis story, and it was Adam and Eve and he made and then some people grow up, they go and marry and say, well, who've they married?
Yeah.
Because it made, so our vicar said, well, God didn't stop creating after he created Adam and Eve. And so what I'm saying is, if things are likely to be plural, then it could have been plural of Adam and Eve, couldn't
Well,
it?
let's say you're not doing Adam and Eve, are you?
No, not
Right.
No,
Okay, right.
because they're plural in Genesis 1.
Sorry.
God
Well,
created-
yeah. Well, if you deconstruct, I mean, I'm going to piece of complete deconstruction here.
Oh,
Right.
yeah, that's right.
Firstly, Adam is not Adam; it's Adam, the Adam. Yeah,
That's true.
and where we've got taken from his side, it's not. It's taken from his back. In Jewish thought, Adam and Eve were were a hybrid creature. They weren't. It wasn't kind of, you know, Adam's there feeling a bit snoozy, so he whips his rib out and sort of sprinkles some fairy dust, and the woman fully grown and ready for everything appears. Yeah. So the language, the Hebrew language, well, it's plural, I say, yeah. So that's the Hebrew understanding of Adam and Eve. Yeah. They were one creature, and God separated them.
I suppose you could derive that from a particular reading of Genesis 1, which says God created, male and female who created them.
Yeah.
That could, I wouldn't personally go
No,
to that
no,
one,
Hebrew
but-
says it does create them simultaneously.
Yeah,
literally
yeah, that's right.
So, but you see, we miss all these things. We miss it, and these things become readily understandable when we kind of de-grease it. You know, take the Greek philosophy off of it, take modern theology away, and let's get back to saying. I mean, various versions of the Bible, you know, are quite nastily doctored in places here and there. And let's remember, of course, that the chapters and verses didn't exist until the invention of the printing press, and that's why you got people think. And I've heard it preached by quite famous preachers. You know, I'm not talking about silly ones on television. I'm talking about proper preachers. You know, and they will make great separations between the chapters and verse and make one story into two, and it doesn't make any sense. So I've got to be careful for that.
Yeah. Genesis 1 doesn't even end in the right place.
Well, exactly. Oh, it's a worry.
So
Isn't
if
it?
it answers that question, how would you then answer that question
Which question?
about the vicar?
Plural.
Plural.
Oh,
Thought you had.
who did,
Sorry, I'm sorry, Jim. We got.
As I
Oh,
heard,
did the offspring
the question was that there was more Adam and Eve, and that was plural. That was the question that I heard.
Oh no, well. I mean, basically, let's try and see what it's saying. What is this story trying to tell us? Okay. Now, these stories are very often referred to as myths. Okay. Now we start to think of a myth as a glorified fairy story or a folk tale. It isn't. What a myth is an essential component. I'll tell you, let's just look at this. I'll look at that in a minute. But to answer your question, what we're talking about is a question of ideals and a story of crime and punishment. We're talking about obedience to God, and this is the theme that's running right through this. Right, finding God, yeah, honouring God, disobeying God, being punished for disobeying God, yeah, and that was right through these 11 chapters and the 17 things altogether. Now, the other thing we need to bear in mind is, does anybody know what semiotics are? Does anybody even know the word?
Something to do with language, so I can't remember.
Symbols.
Symbols, right. Yeah.
Has anybody ever heard of Umberto Eco?
Yes.
The Name of the Rose, Christ,
Yes.
Christ Up to
Yeah.
Eberly, things like that. Yeah, he's Professor of Semiotics at the University of Turin. Basically, semiotics and myths go together because they represent symbols, not in a mysterious way. This is interesting. Not like Egyptians, with Ankh and Anubis and Horus. Yeah, these represent, these convey images of spiritual truths. Now, you've got to remember that everything in oral history has to be fairly brief. Okay? As it's passed down, because there's no writing. I mean, can you imagine Genesis, for instance? Can you imagine somebody there with the old hammer and chisel there back? You need a mountain range, wouldn't you? Even in Roman times, Wright's writing was on a wax tablet that's not even as big as this. So they couldn't get very much in there with wet clay there.
Those were hand size,
This
lot of
stuff.
them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The Romans invented the iPad, but it was a piece of wax.
Got back to the
Smarty pants. Yeah. So I lost myself now. Yeah. So basically, oral histories have to be kept short, and they have to have various words, expressions, or symbols or images. Yeah, that convey a lot. This is where we start hitting some of our problems in our things in Genesis, because there's things in there where a single word or a single expression conveys a whole amount of stuff. Okay, now in Judaism, time of Jesus going back before that, they used to have various ways of teaching, and one of them is called a remez. Okay. And a remez is just a few words, and you're supposed to know the whole lump of teaching that goes with it.
Yeah.
And if you don't know that, and if you don't know the Old Testament, you can't understand Jesus' teaching. I'm sorry, you don't.
Yeah.
You just simply don't. We're getting back to the vain imaginations again. It's very, very difficult, isn't it? Any of you remember? Well, I know that Margaret knew him well, but does any you remember Dwight Pryor? Yeah, for man, one of the best Bible teachers I've come across. But he always used to say, it's a lifetime of learning. And you've heard me say it a million times. I know less today than I knew 20 years ago. Because it's a lifetime of learning. And we don't live 4,000 years ago. Society's changed vastly. The meaning of language has changed. Example, in the King Arthur version, these things, what was it? Pay for charity?
Yes.
Yeah? Charity, when we think of charity, we think of Charles Dickens' The Workhouse, don't we? But it's a Jacobean translation of the word agape. So there's three Greek words for love. Yeah, eros, sex, Philadelphos, brotherly love. Yeah, agape, the love of God. So in Shakespeare you find this, where Montjoy said to Henry V, give us charitable license to bury our dead. Yeah, will you show God's love in letting us do this? So that was the current word. But today, it means completely different. So I mean, when sort of, I think the Good News Bible's probably the first one that simplified it or corrected that, and the greatest thing is love. But it would have been better if it was God's love. Still, and the lack of even with a lot of Bible translators, two of the problems you've got is the theological position that they hold. Right now, let's take the Greek expression in Paul's writings, glossain lalia. There is only one way that can possibly be translated. There's no wiggle room in that one. Speaking in tongues, right? Now, that means different things to different people. I think we're on the same page on that one. But J.B. Phillips Bible and so on, Phillips was the brethren, and they didn't believe in the charisma, speaking in tongues, so therefore, ecstatic utterances. Doesn't mean that at all. When you speak in tongues, you're speaking with your full mind, aren't you? You're not in ecstasy. You're not a fuzzy wuzzy or a Sufi whirling round, are you? Whirling dervishes. It's nothing like that at all. And of course, there is another thing. Speaking in tongues is an interesting phenomena, which I personally think is very badly misunderstood. Yeah, because it wasn't a new thing that arrived with Paul. I mean, Nirgun in Jewish practice goes back there, and that is actually you're reading the scriptures and worshipping inarticulately. Yeah, which is more, I suppose. It's not a mantra, but it's very akin to sort of meditation. But then again, why do we worship? That and helps us meditate. I'm using meditation in the correct way here, just by the way. Focusing our attention on God, and like the davening, yeah. Medically, that stimulates your brain, so you can read your scriptures better. That's why they do it. I mean, they didn't know that's why it was, but that's actually why it is. And it's like with worship and speaking in tongues. These are things that bring us nearer to God because we're concentrating on God, yeah, and not concentrating on all this other stuff. These can be going on. So there are vast amounts of daft ideas about things, really. But if people would only just simply learn, this is my plea to all. Let's keep learning. Let's keep learning. Let's keep studying. Study to show yourself approved. Don't sit watching Christian television, yeah, and listening to nonsense. Well, it is, isn't it?
Not all of it, some of it.
Sorry?
Not all of it.
Well, a lot of it is, John. Let's be fair. I mean, weren't we all so glad? Weren't we all glad? Weren't we so thrilled when Copeland banished COVID on the 28th of March 2 years ago? Defeated it and humiliated it and cast it off the face of the earth? I mean, I'm so grateful to him, I can't begin to tell you.
Yes, there's better things on YouTube than there are on Christian television.
Well, exactly. I would say that actually. Get far better stuff on YouTube. I think. Well, I mean, it's right. Not all rubbish.
You get everything on YouTube.
No, it's not rubbish. I actually did 12 programmes for the God channel that was on. No, that was all right. Anyway, just quickly. I think we've got some questions to ask, and I think the questions are answered in these first chapters of Genesis. Really, let's think about how did the society, how did the people actually come to exist? Was it always like this? Yeah, we were always towns, cities, communities, groups. No, but it does give us an idea how it started, doesn't it? Yeah. Why do we do the things that we do? I mean, that varies, doesn't it, from various places. I mean, I don't know whether this is just a Leeds thing, but I mean, if you knock the salt over, do you used to throw some over your shoulder for the devil? Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
But why do you do it? It's quite interesting, actually.
Superstition.
Yeah, well, it's so superstitions. Walking
Was that a painting of the Last Supper?
Sorry?
Was that a painting of the Last Supper?
Yeah.
That's
That's where it comes from.
The salt part that was tipped over.
Tipped over. Yeah. Yeah. Why are certain things forbidden? That's a good question, isn't it? Why are certain things forbidden? Now, if we look at the kashrut, if we look at the Jewish food laws, why are these things forbidden? Well, generally because they were poisonous. Generally speaking, pigs had tapeworms. Yeah. Bottom feeders, live off effluent, shall we say? It's a polite word. I mean, there are one or two, but my favourite kosher story I will just share with you. It's a real one. It was a debate between two rabbis in the 13th century, and they were in top end of the desert, and Sukkot was coming up, and they couldn't find enough wood and things to make the sukkah booth out of. So the debate was: is it possible to use an elephant as a wall of your sukkah booth?
Only if it doesn't move.
What's the answer? Yes, because it's kosher animal. Even they wouldn't eat it. Likewise, a camel, because I mean, a lot of people don't realise that camels are pachyderms. Did you know camels are pachyderm?
No, I didn't.
I feel so let down. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, this is really why we get some of these stories, because nobody within the mist, nobody really knows.
You really mean camels are pachyderms, or some rabbis pronounce them to be pachyderms?
No, genetically they're pachyderms.
Okay.
I know that because it's a question of mastermind. Now the other thing is what legitimises authority. Now I think that's one of the big questions in Genesis. What legitimises authority? Now, I shouldn't say this really, but I'm going to, because I always do. I have a problem with self-appointed Christian leadership. And we never announced our church. Now, one of the biggest churches in our town, I feel so ashamed about this, was actually a student of mine when I was principal of a school. That's Poshworth headmaster. Private schools don't have head teachers, have principals. Yeah, it was a student of mine, and the church that he went to broke up. So some of the other people decided to start their own. And to this day, that man's never been to Bible college, knows absolutely nothing, and preaches the biggest load of trash you've ever heard in your life, except prosperity. Three of his congregation were told to stop taking tablets because now faith and died. You know, and this sort of thing going on. You know, and that really concerns me. So it's a good question. What legitimises authority? Well, it tells us in Genesis, doesn't it? Yeah, following God.
Yeah.
Seeking righteousness. Yeah. I mean, to me, the most important teaching of Jesus is in a single line. Seek first the kingdom of God. And these things.
And his righteousness.
Yeah. I was just waiting to say, oh, you beat me to, I was going to say, you beat me to, I was just going to ask you what was missing. Yeah. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Now, isn't that the message?
Yeah.
Even though it's not expressed, isn't that the message? You see, the message of creation and the message of salvation, like I say, Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, it's there that writing was invented, it's there that formulated speech came from, and all these kind of things. If we read...
Ordered society.
Ordered society, yeah. Now, Israel was always meant to be a theocracy. Yeah, God, and this is interesting, really, isn't it? Because you can see the reflection of this coming in. Now, Israel does not belong to the Jewish people; it belongs to God,
Yeah.
and He's made them lifetime tenants until He returns, so to speak. Yeah, and it's very important that we honour God in all things. In Judaism, there are a lot of unnecessary prayers, I think, and rituals and things like this. But at least they're trying to honour God in what they do. You see, I was so impressed with Marina. She honoured God because there was not enough people to work for us. Yeah, and people can't work for nothing over there because even if they're working full time, on the bread line. Yeah, but she took it upon herself to pay somebody out the little bit that she had. Now, surely if that's not seeking righteousness, I don't know what is. You know. And I think it's a good lesson. Well, I've learned a good lesson from it. I mean, I would never have allowed it to have happened if I'd known. But like I say, it's like these vows that Rob said. You don't because you've got to take 6 months off. You don't start paying them. Not in Ukraine. Starve. I've had that experience in my life of seeing people dead, frozen on the street. On one occasion, I have one old child dead, frozen in his own urine in Eastern Europe, and it still happens. Believe me. One of the biggest causes of death in Ukraine has been starvation. Because if you're old people, if you're over 60, you weren't allowed out of your apartment. And if you went out of and if there was nobody to look after you, you just died of starvation. I mean, it's hard to think of that, isn't it? In this day and age. But you know, I was saying to Maria, that's my wife, in case anyone didn't know. I was talking to her about the other day, and we were just talking about this particular incident, and about when I got these broken ribs, and she said, I can't believe things like that. And I said, you lead a sheltered life, you know. you live in a Christian world where people are all very smiley and quite backstabbing in a lot of instances, but you know they don't normally take drugs and live on sink estates with a social mobility 600. Do you know it's only 600 yards on some of these estates? Yeah, the pub and the shop and the betting shop. That's it. That's all they go. Don't go into town. Nothing. Yeah, but these people live these don't live lives like you and I lead.
Absolutely.
And you know, after a certain amount of time, you can forget that these things exist. And that's why I've always made it my business over the years, wherever I live, to go around go everywhere, you know what I mean? And talk to people when you can. I'm not an evangelist because I'm no good at it. But I do believe in the other sort of evangelism, that is caring for people.
Yeah.
I do believe in that other evangelism that is getting involved in people's lives. Yeah, by your fruits you shall know them. Yeah, so that evangelism can do, but I just can't do the thing that you... Yeah, and particularly Tracy do. I mean, I just never can do it. It's, but then I guess it's each their own, isn't it? We're not all called to the same things. You know, it's like a friend of mine and his wife. They go out on the streets and play a little bit of folky music, you know, flute and guitar, and then a few sort of old sort of Christian sort of things, and then they get talking to people, and they do it that way. Yeah, so people stop to listen to the music and that sort of thing, which is great. Yeah, so good luck to all of them. So I think that's about break time, is it? Or should we do another few minutes? Or, yeah. Okay, let me just run. Let's just. I've repeated myself a lot, but there's two questions I think that remain, and the very important one. Why is the human condition so miserable? Why are people never satisfied? No, really. Why are people, by and large, never satisfied? Ezekiel talks about it, doesn't he? 2 daughters, Oholiab and Ohela, 2 gaping mouths, ever open, always demanding more. Yeah? But the human condition, when you look at it, as I say, I have to remind myself, yeah, despite my... I'm not discontented. I mean, I learned to be content umpteen years ago. Yeah, you know, when you don't work for anybody, you don't get a salary and all these things, you have to be. You know what I mean? I mean, sometimes you got money. Sometimes you know you're phoning the council because you can't pay the tax and all this sort of thing. But I'm not worried about it, and I'm content. Yeah, I'm content with where we live. You know, I'm content with the car that we've got. I'm content with my family. I'm content because I know you guys. My joy, the thing that makes my life is you. Really, you should have you. Yeah, I mean the only people I've talked to on the phone are from Sheffield. Well, I talked to Rosie and Julie down there as well. But it's a good thing to be content, you know. And a guy came to me and he said, I'll just give you 2 quick examples, right? And this is where I think honouring God is so important, and this primary push with this Genesis 11 thing. He said, I had a friend who's an entrepreneur. Yeah, he lost his money, most of it, nearly all of it, in the bank crash, you know, some years ago. But he used to drive around in his Bentley, and he used to support 6 different ministries that I know of, and he used to tithe 35%. Yeah, plus what he gave elsewhere. Yeah, and this guy said to me, so carnal driving around in that car. I said, what are you on about, so carnal driving around that car? He says, well, you shouldn't be driving a car like that, you know, and all this business. He says, why should he have that and I don't have more? I said, because he couldn't trust you with it. Plain and simple. Maybe that's what I've no money. No, but what I'm trying to say, it's so important to be content. You see, when we in the days of the former Soviet Union, we used to go sneaking in there on educational exchanges or whatever reason you had, and you used to have to sleep in the van in the middle of winter. Yeah, food, if you saw meat, was a minor miracle. Yeah, you'd be sleeping on floors and everything, and I was content. I was living worse than some of the people who live there were, which is hard. Yeah, content. if you're content, you can function.
Yeah.
If you're content, you function. Because if you're content, you're not worshipping yourself, as was suggested to me. You're content because you know that God is in control of your life. He's in control of your days. And as I say, I think the difficult things when we pray for people who are sick, if it's their time, there's nothing you can do about it. You can pray the Lord to delay it, and I'm not saying we wouldn't have that prayer, because we've seen it, yeah? But by and large, you do have to realise sometimes, including yourself, that if the Lord's calling you home, you're going.
Yeah.
And be content with that as well. You know, very difficult, but they're the lessons, I think, from Genesis. Yeah? Start wanting things that you can't be trusted with, going up to heaven and being like God. Yeah? Having the knowledge that you're not entitled to. Yeah? Having unhelpful relationships, having wrong relationships. And this is always a big thing, because you remember when Esther and Nehemiah came back, there's this big contract on about the foreign wives. Yeah? And like our Genesis 6:1-4, what we're really talking, I really believe what we're talking about was godly people marrying ungodly people. And look what happened to Solomon. Wisest man ever. Yeah, gets carried away by a sexual drive and starts introducing all the gods and goddesses. So the lessons are very plain. So let's not despise these first 11 chapters. Let's try and really learn from them. Because if we don't understand the lessons in Genesis 1-11, we're not going to understand any of it. Amen?
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.